Welcome, investigator. Evil is on the rise. Crime is escalating. Our mission is to eliminate the crime by exposing evil, examine why it manifests, and highlight the brave souls that confront it every day. Join us as we work together to bring justice to every victim. Welcome to All Things Crime. Here's your host, Jared Bradley.
Hey, everybody. It's Jared. Welcome to another episode of All Things Crime. Appreciate you being here. Can't do this without you. And I also can't do it without amazing detectives like Detective Ryan Peat that we have on today. He's out of North Aurora, Illinois. And we are going to be talking about a victim from 1979.
Correct.
A young girl named Kathy Hale. And to get us started, this is a special case for a number of reasons, not only because it's so old, but also because how it was solved and the number of people and the decades that it took to solve it. I think there's a news article out of ABC 7, I think it's out of Chicago, that really illustrated this well. And I'm gonna keep referring back to it. But I want to get started with this. And I think this line, Detective Pete, and I appreciate you coming on the show, by the way.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Oh, it's my pleasure. You guys, amazing work up there. But I want you to, Ryan, kind of expound on this line. It says, Hale, meaning Kathy Hale, was the picture of youth in the late 70s. So this is from 1979, by the way.
Correct.
Bright eyes under glasses, overalls, and feathered hair. Now, those of us that weren't alive in the 70s, you probably don't remember the how popular overalls were. But for those of us that were, yeah, I remember getting dressed up in those a number of times. But anyway, Hale was the picture of youth in the late 1970s with bright eyes under glasses, overalls, and feathered hair. Tell us more about Kathy and what you know, especially from the case file, and how intimately you guys get to know some of these victims.
Yeah, so this one obviously happened way before my time starting here. So as far as the victimology, it was kind of everything that the previous detectives have done, what we read in reports and what we saw and, the other documentaries and stuff that have been done since then. But, yeah, she was, for all we could tell, just a typical 70s teenager. That I don't really know much about her as far as if she was a big partier or if she was, just a normal teenage girl or, so we don't have a ton being that she was gone for so long before I started on, other than what was written in the reports previously. And there wasn't a lot of victimology at that point. So.
Well, how old was she when she passed away?
She was 19.
19.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Just turned 19.
19 years old, just in the prime of her life. And she was, now my understanding is she was headed out to a shopping center to go pick up her sister. Is that correct?
Yeah. So her and her sister and another roommate lived in one of our local apartment complexes. And the sister worked up the street about a mile into Aurora. We're surrounded on three sides by the city of Aurora. And so she, was supposed to pick up her sister at 9 p.m. that night when she got off her shift at the Jewel Osco food store. When Kathy didn't arrive, her sister called around 10 o'clock and nobody knew what had happened to Kathy. The roommate had said that basically Kathy had left earlier to go pick her up, and that was the last they had seen of her.
Mm. So I'm assuming there was a big search out for her.
Yeah. So initially she was reported as a missing person, and again, not to degrade anything that was done in 1979, but it was initially as being an irresponsible teenager. She was just doing what teenagers do and didn't, went out partying or something instead of going to pick up her sister like she should have. So it wasn't a whole lot of police work put into it the first several hours of her being missing.
Mm. Well, it's interesting, especially in being in the suburbs of Chicago. I imagine a lot of the police were focused on, different things, and and I remember back then it's hard for people to understand nowadays how lax things were back then. I mean, I grew up in the 70s. I was, I was probably 16 in 1979, something like that. Maybe, no, I was 13. So, or I'm in 79. But
Yeah.
anyway, the, you never worried about anything. It's like we'd be out playing around, and when it was pitch black, that's when we needed to be home. When the street lights came on, right? And so the parents never worried about you. The thought that you might get snatched by a serial killer,
Right.
that just never occurred. And
No, in 1979, North Aurora was it was a very small town. There was about 5,400 people here at that time living in the town. Um, and these types of crimes didn't happen here. It was a very small, close knit community. Everybody kind of knew everybody. It was, definitely a different town than it is today. Still a smaller town, being around 20,000 now, but I believe there was about 8 cops working the entire city at that time, on the regular 24-hour schedule. So it wasn't anything like it is today with in Aurora being surrounded by it. There was a lot of rural areas in Aurora still at that time too. So there wasn't the crime. There wasn't this type of crime definitely wasn't on the radar for, so when a girl goes missing, it's like, now she's just doing what kids do. It's not, you don't automatically jump to what it could be.
yeah, yeah. So at what point do you, I don't know if it's in the case file, but at what point did it go from being like kind of a small concern to, hey, this girl's, we need to really start looking for this girl?
Earlier that, or I'm sorry, so she was initially reported missing around 10 p.m. The police officer that took the initial report, again, just kind of blew it off. It's like, well, let me know when she shows up. They were called later that night around 3 a.m. Some of the family members found Kathy's car parked in a different location in the parking lot of the apartment complex. So where her car's usually parked, like say on the west side of the building, it was now parked over on the east side of the building, furthest point away from her apartment. One of the windows was down, and when they started inspecting the vehicle, there was a small pool of blood in the back seat on the floorboard, and the car had been ransacked. So at that point, they kind of ramped up that this may not just be a typical missing person, or I'm sorry, a typical teenager, out being irresponsible.
And then the days following, how did that go?
So for the next 3 weeks, there was no sign of Kathy. They did find her purse located on top of her apartment complex. Just some of the neighbors were out searching the area. They had a search. Her dad at the time worked for the FAA building, and so they had airplanes and stuff in the area, and they were able to kind of search some of the rural areas, the cornfields and stuff, all with negative results. So for about 3 weeks, it was a missing persons case where they just didn't know. They figured at this point something had happened, whether it be a kidnapping or ultimately a murder. But they were at that point, it was ramped up a little bit. The Illinois State Police were involved to assist us at that point as well, and we were using their crime labs and their facilities to kind of help whatever evidence we did recover.
And then after about 3 weeks, how was she finally found?
There was a 12-year-old boy that was fishing in the Fox River with his father, and he found her. It was in April 24th, I believe. I have notes here. Yeah, so on April 24th, 1979, her body was found floating in the Fox River about 200 yards south of the I-88 bridge and about 15 feet off the shore.
Like get snagged on a tree or something?
That I don't know. I know they just found the body floating.
Okay.
There wasn't a lot of detail as to how she came to rest in that location.
Now, do you think that she was in the river from the time she went missing?
Yes. Yeah, that's our belief. We don't have 100% timeline, but from what we know now of the offender and what we were able to discover through other cases, more than likely she was taken directly from her apartment, abducted in her apartment complex, and then he drove her down towards the river area where she was assaulted and strangled, and then put in the river.
And this is we're talking about Bruce Lindahl. We'll talk about him in just a minute, but basically, what was determined that he did to her?
Well, we do know from the evidence that we found in the with the MVAC is that she was sexually assaulted, and then she was strangled. As far as we can tell, there was a bruise on her face to the point where we believe she was probably knocked unconscious at some point. It appears that she was punched in the face, and there was to the point where she bit through her lip. And then one of the other things that kind of tied us or started leading us towards Bruce, there was a small pockmark like on her collarbone area. And I know in some of the other cases where the victims were able to escape, Bruce had used like a compass type tool or an ice pick and held it to their neck, like in that area, and then forced them into the car. So that kind of started, painting a picture of kind of Bruce's MO.
Yeah, I've heard of a lot of other cases where I actually helped on some of them where a suspect, like especially like Bruce Lindahl, once he's perfected his craft, if as disgusting as that is, but once they get really good at doing what they do, they use knives and things like that more as a controlling device as opposed to trying to use it to what it was initially designed for, and that was like stabbing somebody or slicing. They'll use it to control somebody, inflict fear, and then that's why he may have used a knife, but she may not have had any knife wounds on her. Is that
Correct?
Pretty consistent with what you're seeing?
Yes, yeah, for sure. She didn't, as far as we know, he never used a knife on, except for the final victim where he ended up killing himself. But for him, it was always more control. Like he would try to, um, uh, I know in some of the other cases, he would disable vehicles, and then as they were trying to start their cars, he would approach and initially as a friendly, like, "Hey, let me help you out." And then when they would get in the front seat to try to start the car, he would hold a sharp object to their neck, force them into the passenger seat, and then drive away with them. He would. I know that was on the Deb Colliender case. That was what happened with her as she was trying to help him start his car that he had disabled himself so that it would look as though he was stranded and needed help. So that was kind of his MO from what we can tell.
All right. So, yeah, it's just heartbreaking. I mean, I again, growing up in that time, I think back about some of like my older brother, some of the girls that he would have been hanging out with in that time. Just wearing those typical felt overalls and feathered hair. It's like it just bringing back so many memories. It's crazy, but yeah, just a young girl has all these ideas of what she's going to do in college or wherever she's headed. Just trying to earn some money and enjoying life. Finally, got a little bit of freedom.
Yeah.
Of age that she can move out of the house and she's considered an adult and has her whole life in front of her and just probably as innocent comes, and then cross paths with this guy, Bruce Lindahl. And I was reading up on him a little bit, on Wikipedia. It jumps in and says he was a serial killer and rapist who committed a series of rapes and murders in the late 1970s and early 1980s. In 2020, Lindahl was connected to the death of 16-year-old Pamela Maurer. And I'm assuming she's the one that connected through her DNA. It got connected to Kathy Hale, correct?
Correct. Yeah, that's where they originally. So Lisle PD reopened their case, and again, a lot of the credit for this case has to go to the work that Lisle PD did and uncovering everything that Bruce, because he wasn't really on our radar at that point as a potential suspect in this case.
Mm-hmm.
I know he'd been arrested in town a couple of times. We were able to track him back that he worked in a factory right down the road from the police department here. He was a meter reader for the gas company, so he was in the area And then as a hobby photographer, he would frequent the Northgate Shopping Plaza where um, Kathy's sister worked. And and it was kind of the hangout, in the 70s, how it was with the cars, and, kids would hang out there with their cars. And that was the big um, car shows, and the teenage hangout was go hang out at the Northgate Shopping Plaza back then. So he would frequent that area, hang out with the other teenagers, and even though he was in his 20s at the time, it was he was still that type of guy, and so yeah, everything was yeah, that was
Yeah. Well, and again, on part of it I was reading, it said people that knew him thought, he was just this normal dude that didn't have any kind of really red flags that killing small animals or anything like that. He was just kind of maybe had a little bit of a quick temper, but for the most part was just kind of a regular guy. And then turns out he was actually connected, or they think that he was connected to 9 rapes and 12 murders.
Yeah, there is and again, I don't want to get into. There's a lot of other circumstantial evidence, and that's where we were. So there was a documentary done called The Box, and it was done on Paramount UK's, and they released it overseas. But they came to us and talked to us about that at the time, and all we had was circumstantial evidence.
Mm-hmm.
We believed Bruce could have been involved. We didn't have anything at the time that was hard evidence that said, yes, Bruce is the one who killed Kathy. So we kind of didn't really buy into that
Yeah.
documentary
Okay.
at the time as being tied to our case.
Well, but we know for sure that he was involved with 2 of them, correct?
Correct. Yes. Yeah. So
Okay.
when they were doing that documentary on the Lyle case, when Lyle initially opened up their case, that's when we started looking into ours. They sent out what's called a critical reach, that anybody that has any unsolved sexual assault, murders by strangulation, kind of give the MO. And at that point, the detectives that were working here, they were kind of like, well, wait a minute, let's look into this. This may have something to do with the Kathy Halle case. So we were, so that's how we kind of opened everything back up.
So what were some of the things that triggered you particularly about Kathy that you were hearing about?
Well, the strangulation, the sexual assault, so that was the kind of stuff. And then just really the way she went missing, the just the circumstantial stuff. There was a lot of circumstantial evidence that they would have known the same people. They would have been in the same circles. So there was just a lot of stuff that really kind of tied him into it, but there wasn't any hard evidence at the time. And so that was where we were kind of stuck.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of hard handling that with the family, because they're seeing this documentary that, they sent it to the family and said, hey, what do you guys think? And then they're coming to us going, well, they're saying Bruce killed Kathy. How come you guys can't figure this out? And we're like, we don't have any evidence. So it kind of put us in a hard spot, where we're trying to be sympathetic with the family of like, we're still looking into this case. And then they're seeing a documentary on their, Amazon Prime that says, well, this guy killed our sister and our daughter. How come the police haven't figured it out? So it was kind of a sore, touchy subject around here for a few weeks as we were getting the ball rolling again with the case.
Sure. Yeah. It's interesting how few people don't understand the difference between, what somebody on a news show or a podcast or, even a drama related type of a show, they can call it a documentary, but how much of that is speculation?
Absolutely.
And then,
Yeah.
and then the different standard that you guys have to operate under. It's like, you can't, how much trouble would you be in if you go out and accuse somebody of being a serial killer and a rapist, and then it turns out they're not?
Correct. Yeah, it was it was definitely a touchy subject around here with the, just
Yeah.
people's feelings were hurt, and the guys that are really working hard on this case, and it's getting pulled out from underneath them with circumstantial evidence at best, and so it was like I said, it was touchy for a while.
Yeah. Well, it's unfortunate that happens, but I actually knew of a case in Australia, because we work with some agencies down there with the MVAC, and is crazy. I mean, they've literally had to threaten some podcasters with like lawsuits because these guys are like tipping off potential suspects and just literally broadcasting the as the detective, and who knows, whoever was feeding them information, they're equally as fault. But I don't know. I think, what, sometimes people just go way too far with, trying to put things together. And I understand everybody wants to hear the latest, and, it's the now generation. But, at the same time, the standard that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but most of the guys, especially detectives and forensic specialists, they want to put the case together to the point that it can't get overturned.
Correct.
And, that's such a huge standard, and that's such a high standard. You can talk about a case all you want, but until you have hard physical evidence or, some kind of a confession, but even a confession or even an eyewitness, a lot of times those get overturned, and, somebody changes their mind or something or else. But getting physical evidence, isn't that pretty much your you guys' pursuit?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. It has to be, there's a gold standard of evidence that you want to get. And, we've had other cases that, they're not DNA related or to say, but they're, we have another case that it's a doctor says one thing as an expert witness at one point, and then another point he changes his mind and said, well, this could have actually led to this. And it, completely derails the entire case. And it's, it just sits dormant for the next 20 years. And, there's nothing we can do about it. It's just, until technology catches up to where we need it to be with the evidence, then we're just kind of stuck with a lot of these cases.
Yeah. Well, with that in mind, let's go back to Kathy's case. She was, so they find her in the river, and then how was the case pursued from there?
Initially, typical homicide investigation at that point, where they started talking to witnesses, they started talking to neighbors, canvassing neighborhoods, see if anybody saw anything. We didn't have a ton to go on at that point. There was medical examiner, autopsy, the typical things that happen with any death case, or unnatural death, and so we just kind of started building the case from there.
Was now the strangulation, were there any kind of like fingerprints or not fingerprints, but marks around her neck, hyoid bone broken, anything like that?
I don't believe so. I think it was there was the bruising on the face. The the medical examiner did rule it death by strangulation and asphyxiation. So I don't know, but I don't recall any bruising around the neck, or typically Bruce had used. Um, I know with the Pam Maurer case, he had used the automotive hose to strangle her with that one, and there was some bruising where you could see where her hoodie had gotten caught in the hose and kind of bruised around the neck, where you could see the ligature marks there. But I don't believe in Kathy's case, and it could be that the shape her body was in when it was recovered 3 weeks later. A lot of that stuff wasn't as apparent as it would have been if she was discovered right away.
Yeah. Any water in the lungs?
No.
Okay.
So she was dead when she was placed in the water.
Yeah. Again, you think about what it would, I mean, again, most of us have absolutely no comprehension how you could actually take a young girl like that and, forcefully rape her, and then to go the next step and actually strangle her, which is, people in the movies, you always see strangulation, like, oh yeah, in 10 seconds they pass out and then they're dead. And it's typically not like that. I know a lot of, especially if they're familiar with the victims, like the boyfriend or something like that, they'll even cover up the face because while they're strangling the victim, it's so brutal. And, the eyes staring at them and things like that they just can't handle it. But, it doesn't sound like Bruce Lindahl had that much problem with it.
No, and we talk about it here, just the mindset of someone like that with, being involved in, officer involved shootings and stuff like that, and seeing what taking a life does to the mentality of somebody or someone's mental state. But to be calm and collected and being that suave, like you're, enough to where a young girl will approach you and talk to you, knowing in the back of your head you're about to assault her and murder her. That mindset in itself is scary and fascinating.
Yeah, well, um, I'm glad serial killers are so rare.
Yes.
The ability to do that once, even, I think messes most people up just for
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
But to be able to do that over and over, even with the assumption that Bruce Lindahl, I mean, we know he did it at least twice, but the thought that he could do that up to possibly 12 times,
Yeah.
it's just absolutely incredible. And the amount of cruelty and just indifference, yeah, hard for most of us to even fathom it, I think, and which is a good thing.
Yes, absolutely.
So fast forward to 2020. How many times prior to that had detectives pulled the Kathy's case out and looked at it? Do you know?
It was never, so we don't really close the cases, or so they just kind of go dormant where it that becomes a cold case at that point. So
Mm-hmm.
we I know in they had looked at it a few times, pretty much every decade. There was something, a new piece of evidence would come in, or another detective would move in, and they're like, "Hey, let's take a look at this again." And there really wasn't anything new for probably 20 years of it. Um, as DNA technology started to progress, we started looking into it again. Now, this is in 2020. The detectives here then met with the boyfriend. They got a DNA sample from him. Nothing matched on that. They attempted a swab of I believe, the underwear at that time, and there was a used tampon that was involved that was found in the backseat of Kathy's car. And they pulled DNA off of that, and all they were able to see is that there's a mixture of multiple people's DNA. But at the time, they couldn't get any profiles off of it because everything was so degraded.
Mm-hmm. Now, how much? Let's stick on the evidence. So in 2020, you had gotten some other standards to compare things with, and then by 2022, you got involved with DNA Labs International in Florida.
Correct.
And so how did all that happen?
Well, that started with they sent me. So for Illinois, for to be a lead homicide investigator, you have to be lead homicide certified. It's just a continued education class. You have to do an initial 40-hour class, and then your continued education every 3 years, so many hours of continued ed. So for my initial class, one of the blocks of education on there was Deputy Chief Larry Rafferty from Orland Park PD taught on uh, the MVAC, and he started talking about DNA and cold cases and some of the stuff they've been able to do. He worked for a larger department prior to Orland Park, and they had a pretty high profile case that the MVAC and other DNA technology was used to start gathering leads and evidence on that case. So he was pretty up to par with what the MVAC was, and was started talking about it and some of the technologies it could do. So I grabbed him after class and asked him about this case, and he's like, "Well, you definitely need to talk to Kara Stephenson, who is a DNA specialist for the Cook County State's Attorney's Office." So that several conversations with Larry, then I had several conversations with Kara, and we just started building what we thought would be the best chance to, basically hit the home run on the first try here with limited funding. So we were talking about how do you remove a body once they're already dead into the river. So we talked about like underneath her coat, we had all of her clothing still, we had her shoes, her pants, and her underwear. And so we talked about like if you grabbed her from underneath the arms and drug her backwards into the river, there could be touch DNA still available on the armpits and the sleeves of the coat. We said if he would have dragged her by her shoe tops, then we talked about, unbacking the top of the shoes and her pant cuffs. to see if there was touch DNA on any of those, and then just getting a better sample of everything in and around the underwear. We talked about a lot of times sexual assaults will pull the underwear to the side for penetration, and then you'll get touch DNA along the leg openings of the underwear, and that was some of the stuff that we were discussing, trying to figure out what would be our best evidence that we had to move forward with higher advanced testing.
Nice. Well, so ultimately, what was the golden ticket that you got the profile from?
It was her underwear. We did find in the crotch of her underwear there was semen that was found still. And the amazing thing, and even so, one, we were pushing the threshold of age with a lot of these cold cases, and that was, so when we get the lab involved, and that's where I jumped ahead there, but Kara suggested reaching out to DNA labs in Florida. So then I called and I talked to Cassandra Pressler down there. She's one of their client specialist reps, and so when we started sending everything down there, we were trying to, again, and that back up again, I apologize. But so talking to them, we initially got a bill. It would have been in the $20,000 range for testing on this stuff. And then they introduced us to Seasons of Justice.
Mm-hmm.
And Seasons of Justice is a nonprofit organization that they provide grants for police departments to investigate cold cases with some of this advanced lab testing. So we were able to fill out a grant application, and then we were granted just about $7,000. At that point, we decided that, okay, let's start with the underwear, the tampon string, and some of the things that we knew that the offender would have had to touch to do what he did to Kathy. And we just happened, again, like I said, we hit the home run. So they invac'd the crotch of the underwear, and they were able to determine that there was semen in there that was 9.4 trillion times more likely to have originated from Bruce Lindahl than any other person. So it was pretty amazing results. And like I said, we were pushing that threshold we were at the 45-year mark. And the fact that she sat in the Fox River, which is, a pretty rapid running river, for 3 weeks, where, her body's being washed of any DNA and stuff for about 3 weeks. And, luckily we just, like I always say, it was the hand of God that kind of pointed us in the right direction of how everything worked out.
Yeah. Did you say 3.4 trillion?
9.4. I have the numbers here somewhere. It was 9.4 trillion times. So yeah,
that's a pretty good number.
Yeah, pretty good. Yeah,
9.4 trillion times more likely that it's Bruce Lindahl. Yeah, that's a pretty good profile.
Yes, yeah, they were absolutely amazed at the results to get a profile this strong. And we knew from some of the other testing that there was a male profile there, but we didn't have enough. Everything was so degraded for the traditional swab and
right.
Just the swab DNA. So
they had swabbed the underwear, like the crotch, before?
Correct. Yes. And the tampon string. And yeah, so there was a male DNA present, but everything was too degraded to get a working profile.
Yeah. Well, we're still working on, exactly where DNA is left behind after swabbing. So yeah, and just an FYI, it's actually University of Chicago that did a study on the efficiency of swabbing. And when people think of swabbing, a great analogy is just a Q-tip. So you have a sterile Q-tip. For those of you that are watching or listening that aren't involved with forensics, then you rub this Q-tip or the swab over the top of the surfaces, and if the CSI or the analyst is really thorough, then they'll spread the kind of spread the fibers apart and kind of expand it a little bit as they rub it. And the harder they can rub it, the better, to get down as deep as they can into the fibers of the clothing or the little rocks, in nooks and crannies where the DNA might be hiding. Well, according to the University of Chicago, between 60 and 80% of the DNA that's originally deposited onto a surface never makes it into the extraction tube, so further down the line. And just based on like cases like Kathy's, we have the pretty much assumption that most of it is left back behind on the evidence. The swab just can't get it. Now, if you have a big blood pool of blood or a big semen stain or something like that, then there's so much DNA there that swabbing does just fine. But when you start getting into degraded DNA, which is definitely what we're talking about here, and it's old, close to 45 years, and um, being in the river for 3 weeks, that's a long time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm assuming the river is fairly cold,
Yes.
but still, if it's fast running for 3 weeks, that water had been rushing up against her body, and to be able to get a profile from that.
Yeah. It was.
But that's why the MVAC is so important for so many of these cases, especially cold cases that where you have degraded or DNA that there's going to be so minute amounts that collecting every single cell possible is just critical. And then we're which is why we're able to help cases and detectives like you guys, and it's just an absolute honor that we um, it's just thrilling. I mean, I can't tell you. So I was at a conference, and the DNA Labs had a booth there, and I talk to those guys all the time when we're at conferences, and they said, by the way, you may want to tune in to channels 7 or whatever it was, at 3:00 when there's going to be a pretty good announcement. So I was like, all right. So I jumped on my computer and pulled up the conference, and lo and behold, there you are. So yeah. So tell me about that. I mean, so the case is solved. You get the results back. What was that? What was like getting that phone call?
It's funny. Like the guy was my partner for 10 of my 13 years on the job, and we worked nights together, and then he moved back to investigations at the same time I did. He's since promoted up to patrol sergeant, but when we were working on this case together back when we were back in investigations together, him and we drove all the evidence, Kathy's clothing, down to Florida from Chicago. And so we were talking like if when we dropped everything off, and he's like, you may get one of the best phone calls that this police department's ever received when you get the news on this, if we get this guy, and that's what it was. So it was kind of a surreal, again, that hand of God moment is that I'm on vacation with my family in Montana. We're hiking in the mountains and, just living life and loving it out in nature. And we get to an area that, for whatever reason, on this one side of the mountain near the car where we just got done with the hike, I had cell service and my phone just blows up, and it's Sergeant Jensen. And he's like, we got the results. Have you seen your email? I'm like, no, let me look it up. And I pull it up, and there it is. And like, as I'm reading that, then Cassie calls me, and she's like, oh my gosh, did you see the email? This is incredible. And so it was, again, that kind of surreal, the only way I can describe it, the hand of God of like, hey, look at where you're standing and look at the news you're getting. And it was just kind of a neat moment. So it was definitely surreal.
I mean, honestly, and I'm not trying to be over dramatic, that news and hearing detectives like you guys talk about stuff like that, it just gives me chills. I mean, it's just that right there is why we do what we do. And so were you able to go and tell the family?
Yeah. So basically what we did, so mom and dad are both still alive. She has two sisters and a brother that are living. And so we had a meeting with our state's attorney, and her entire family came into town, and we just sat around in a round table and just kind of discussed the case, told them what we found out. It was really emotional. Hearing news like that, you don't ever want to hear. It doesn't change anything. And that was kind of the solemn pride in the whole case with it, is that it was, we figured it out, but there's no justice served to Bruce. None of this brings Kathy back, so it was kind of that. It was nice to say we've solved this case, but it didn't really change anything except for the
Mhm.
closure for the family. And that was our biggest thing with it more than anything is, as mom and dad are both in their 90s now, and like, hey, here's what
Mm.
happened, and being able to tell them that was really important to us. I know as the whole team, to being able to close that for them, to kind of give them some answers.
Yeah. And it's, again, uh, it's unfortunate, like you said, that there's no additional justice that can be doled out,
Right.
for the killer. But, um, I would hope that at least they knew, and that was appreciated. But there was a similar case, almost exactly the same. I think it was 43 years old when it was solved down in Montgomery County, Texas,
Okay.
and the the suspect, he was a serial killer as well. When he killed this young girl that was 12, and but he had already been executed for another murder that he had committed. So there wasn't anything that as far as additional justice to be doled out. But the the difference is, I think, that the community, and I'm positive that everybody in the Chicago area appreciated that you guys stuck with it long enough that it actually solved the case. And
Yeah.
there's value in that. And that, when cases go unsolved, even if it takes 45 years, there's still so much value in saying, you know what, if something happens to me or my loved one, I know that the officers and everybody that's involved with North Aurora PD, they are going to stick to it until it's actually solved. And
Yes. Yeah.
to me, that's huge, and I'm sure
Yeah.
there's a huge source of pride for you guys.
Yeah. And it's and I'm not trying to belittle it all, because I'm very proud of it, and it's the definitely a career highlight for me, being the one that to able to type that final report, and a 500-page report that mine's the final one that just says case closed. And but everybody that taught me how to do the job, from the current chief of police to the deputy chief, both deputy chief of police, were FTOs, and sergeants, direct supervisors coming up through the ranks. And they've all three worked as investigation sergeant, and as investigators they've all looked at this case. One of my other mentors, Paul Dilly, who recently retired, he was a detective here for 20 some years and worked on this case throughout his career, from the time he got back here till the day he retired. That was, something that was still active on his desk. And when he's walking out the door, he handed me the file and he said, "It's yours now. You take it and run with it." And so that the pride of that, of being, in that lineage of people that I look up to, is huge. And so it's kind of that part's really neat, for me anyway, as like I said, as a career highlight for me.
Yeah, I imagine. So the how did you inform all these detectives that have worked on the case before?
Mostly text messages, just call them. Paul, I still have contact with on a regular basis, but like one of the old detective sergeants since moved out to Iowa, I was able to Facebook message him, and he's super thrilled that we were able to close it out. And so again, he worked on it for years, and the other ones are still in the building, and they're got to introduce me and be part of the press conference. So it was pretty neat all around.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Chiming in on that, and oh, before I forget, I have to put a plug in here for Season of Justice.
Yes.
Those guys are absolutely amazing. I've
Yes.
had a representative from Season of Justice on the show and talk about their entire process, but that's all private funding,
Yeah.
and they're just people giving back to the community and back to the the concept, and not the concept, but the whole crime solving community that
Yes.
involves everybody from the crime scene investigators and the families all the way to these podcasts. And there's a couple of podcasts that are super, super successful that have kind of been huge contributors to this. And Season of Justice paying out thousands, and that, well, they're up in the millions of dollars now to help fund cases. and solve cases that may have otherwise never been solved. So
Yeah, and it helps, with us being a smaller community, a smaller department, when we have to go to the board and say, hey, here's $20,000 to solve this. One, it's hard to say no. I would imagine, I'm not on the board. I don't want to put words in their mouth, but it's also like, how do you say no to a case where, like, hey, this will possibly help solve this? So it's a big risk for us at that point to come in and say, hey, here's $20,000 on a 45-year-old cold case that's sat in the river for 3 weeks. And even the lab is very skeptical of whether or not we're going to get any results. So,
yeah,
then it kind of seems like, well, what are we thinking then, so Seasons of Justice definitely stepping in and saying, like, no, please go forward with it. And then, the work with Kara Stephenson as far as, like, figuring out what our best options would be. Those conversations were priceless because we were able to then whittle it down and say, okay, well, this is a long shot, but this one seems to be, based on her injuries and everything that happened to her, these are places he would have had to have been to leave DNA. So we started there, and like I said, we hit a home run with the first test, which is, again, all I can say is hand of God with all of it. So
yeah. Well, fantastic. I mean, so I have to ask. I mean, being the president of MVAC, what's the in the North Aurora and the surrounding areas? What's the overall impression of the MVAC system?
Amazing. It definitely was a game changer for us. And I don't know if it's you guys or there's another company going around teaching cold cases. And so somebody recently, I think it was last week sometime, I got like 4 or 5 phone calls where people are like, hey, you were the guy that solved that case. What lab did you use? How do I get a hold of MVAC? So I'm assuming it's a class you guys are putting on somewhere that's talking about this case. And people are reaching out. So I'm able to, definitely spread the word that it was a game changer for us. And, I don't know that, um, the regular swab technology won't get there eventually, but it wasn't there yet. And this put us over the goal line with it for sure.
Yeah, well, it's not us, but
Okay.
there are tons of yeah, even um, retired law enforcement guys, cold case specialists. Um, yeah, Blue Line Group out of North Carolina, they talk about the MVAC all the time. There's
Yeah.
yeah, there's even textbooks that are being taught in universities that have the MVAC in it now.
Awesome.
And there's a number of universities that have purchased the MVAC to incorporate into their curriculum. So, yeah, word's getting out, and
Yeah.
but again, nothing helps our case better than like you guys, where you're actually solving a 45-year-old cold case, and you think about what are the odds that we could find viable DNA in a really good profile off of an area that's already been swabbed.
Yeah.
It was in a river for 3 weeks and still provided a 9.4 trillion level
Yeah. Yeah. It's
DNA
incredible.
profile. That's that's a
Yeah.
strong profile.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like I said, it was a game changer for us. And like you said, it's pushing that age limit of where these cases aren't getting solved older than what that one, you know what I mean? It may be one of the older ones that has been solved with that. So that kind of stuff, it was a game changer.
Music to my ears, man. I appreciate that. Fantastic. So, anything else that we've missed? I mean, there's, lots of news hit that area, and I'm sure for a little while it was chaotic for you guys to, get the word out. But is this kind of does it get brought up much with your fellow detectives?
Yeah, it's kind of become the little ribbing joke of the hero of North Aurora with my partner at work likes to give me a hard time about it with the picture of me at the press conference laminated above his desk. And so yeah, but we do talk about it. But it is, like I said, there's a solemn pride of being able to say that we're this group, especially the investigations team we have right now, that we were the ones that kind of put the ribbon on this and closed it out. And it was, so we're very proud of it. It's a solemn pride as far as, again, like we said, there's no justice. It doesn't bring Kathy back, but being able to bring that closure to the family, that was always what I prayed about with this case going forward, that we'd be able to, just kind of close that for them. And so, yeah.
Well, congratulations and kudos to everybody there that worked on that case. And I mean, there's so many just positive things that comes out of solving a case like this. It's, and obviously with being with MVAC, I mean, we're just like, holy crap. Yeah. We solved another 45-year-old case. The record so far is 56 years.
Okay. All right.
So yeah, you still had 9 years to you had plenty of time, man. No, but again, I go back to the more times this happens where you're solving cases that are super old, that have, you've opened up that case file over the generations. You guys, one detective's handing it off to another detective, and you're saying, "Hey, man, keep on with this and solve it." There's a big case here in Utah that the responding officer to the murder, he'd only been, he was a detective, so the sheriff's department, he'd only been on the force for 3 years. 18 years later, he's the sheriff.
Okay.
And he was able to personally go out. So this is in Utah, but they tracked him down. He was in Florida, and this sheriff who had been, this case was forefront in his mind for 18 years. And even though his career had advanced, he was like, I cannot retire until we solve this case. He was able to fly out to Florida and personally put the cuffs on this guy.
That's awesome. Yeah. Good for him.
Yeah. But just things like that, you're like, how cool was it? You can imagine if the detectives that were, initially responding to Kathy's case, and from the time that they pulled her out of the river all the way to now, when how many of those guys were still around, and was it? I just can't even imagine how the feeling of well, it had to be just a huge rush of emotions of every type.
Yeah.
They're like, you know what? Finally, something that I did, this horrific scene of seeing this young girl who had been murdered, pulled out of the river, just dumped like trash. And yet we're able to get her some semblance of justice. I don't know. I'm a military guy, and I know that so I was with the 101st Airborne, and we would have 3 months of preparation, sometimes 6 months of preparation, like every day, just droning on about, different scenarios that we were going to do, and, kind of walking through, how we would execute a mission. And those 3 months would all go toward about 20 minutes of just out of your mind excitement, jumping out of airplanes and that kind of crap. And then, but I know you guys are kind of in that same boat where, you have all this mundane stuff, you're trying to just review a 500-page case file for the 10th time. And you're trying to find
what did we miss? Yeah.
One little thing in there that's different. And you're like, what technologies are different? How can I apply a new method to this case? And then you finally get a crack at it, and this is the result. So
yeah, it was awesome. And I always, I'm not trying to sound like no ego here with this, but it's like, I didn't do anything. You know what I mean? Like, I gave the evidence to the smart people at the lab and the people like you that developed the technology, and you guys figured it out and gave me the results. So it was kind of people are like, well, what do you think? And I'm like, I just, hey, test this for me and see what you think. So it's kind of again, that solemn pride in the whole thing is that, it was just another piece of the puzzle. I was just able to put the final piece in there. So it was yeah.
Well, let me tell you something, Ryan. That's the exact answer that I would expect from, a good cop, but that's crap. And I just want to put that out there right now, because you 15 years of developing your skills and expertise and networking. You have other detectives that are all contributing to it. Somebody, a light went off when this other case was announced, and the DNA was tied to Bruce Lindahl, and all those things that are connected. That comes from effort. It comes from determination and just commitment to your community and to the victims and the victims' families. So yeah, I know you guys like to, and most of us do, where we're just kind of like giving praise to other people. But I'm going to blow that off and say, yeah, you're the man. Yeah, it's
I appreciate it.
no, it's absolutely awesome that you guys on occasion see the fruits of your labor, and it really comes out. And for a while, we're all able to celebrate together and talk about this and say, yeah, you know what, it's worth doing what we do. And that I frankly, of all the pain and suffering that I've gone through to help this company get to where it is, and the legacy of my dad's invention, and be able to talk to good detectives like you guys and say, hey, this system can help solve cases, and here's proof. So
Yeah, oh, it was great. It was definitely a game changer in the system for sure. So,
well, that's awesome, man. Hey, definitely tell everybody there at North Aurora, how much we appreciate them, and congratulations again on being able to solve Kathy's case. It just warms my heart when I think of her, and hopefully she's up in heaven somewhere, enjoying things, but finally seeing at least her case has come to a close. And
yeah, absolutely.
But hopefully it inspires somebody else that may be listening to this podcast, or somebody that's listening to it that tells a detective about it. Say, hey, have you heard of this technology or this technique? Call Detective Ryan Peat and find out how he
Absolutely.
solved this case. And
that's and that's, I enjoy doing these. Just for that is that we didn't know about this technology until I went to this class. So as the more people we can tell about it, the more cases I think are going to get solved, and hopefully put some pretty bad guys behind bars and go that route with it. So,
well, we need to get an MVAC up in you guys' area.
Yeah, I thought, was the IRS going to buy one? Or is that what I heard? That
the IRS of all the crazy things, the IRS in Chicago has one. So
yeah.
And from what they've told us, they're willing to help out agencies. So you guys,
that we had talked to them about it when we were trying to figure out CODIS, to get into the Illinois CODIS database to see if it wasn't on Bruce. So that was a whole nother story. But
yeah. Well, but for sure, what everybody needs to understand is if there's a way that we as a company of MVAC systems, if we can help any agency, we absolutely will. So hope nobody hesitates to call us. So
perfect. Oh, you guys have been great. The system was great. DNA Lab was great. Seasons of Justice, all of it. So we appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Your attention today brings us one step closer to exposing and eliminating the evil that brings crime to our communities. Hit subscribe and share this episode. Together, we will bring justice to every victim.